My son told me I had until the end of Christmas dinner to sign the house over to him. He slid the papers across the table like it was a business meeting. I picked them up, looked at them slowly, then set them back down and said, "You're right. Let's talk about paperwork." He smiled. He had no idea. I meant mine. I spent 31 years as a certified public accountant. I built a practice from nothing, filed taxes for half of Dayton, Ohio, raised my son alone after my wife Carol passed from ovarian cancer in 2019. I watched him at the funeral, crying into his new wife's shoulder, and I thought, he has good people around him now. He'll be fine. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things where my son was concerned. His name is Derek. He's 41. His wife is Melissa. They've been married 4 years. Her mother, Patricia, a woman who moves through other people's homes like she owns them, was there too that Christmas. The three of them arrived at my house on Riverton Drive in separate cars, which should have told me something. You don't bring separate cars to Christmas dinner unless you're planning to leave in a hurry. I'd cooked everything myself. Prime rib, roasted potatoes, green bean casserole, a pie I'd been working on since the night before. I set the table the way Carol used to. Good plates, cloth napkins, candles in the center. I pressed my hand flat on the tablecloth before they arrived and stood there for a moment in the quiet. The house smelled like rosemary and butter. Carol would have loved it. Derek walked in without ringing the bell. He never rings the bell. His wife came behind him carrying a bottle of wine she'd clearly grabbed from a gas station. Patricia followed last, already scanning the living room like an appraiser. "You should really think about downsizing," Patricia said before she'd even taken off her coat. "A man alone in a 4-bedroom house. It's wasteful." I took her coat without responding, hung it in the hall closet. Patricia ran her finger along the bookshelf as she walked past it, examining the tip of her finger afterward. I watched her do it and didn't say a word. Dinner started quiet enough. Derek talked about his job in commercial real estate, how the market was shifting, how you had to be smart about assets right now. He used the word assets 4 times in 10 minutes. Melissa watched him the way a person watches a performance they've rehearsed together. Patricia ate with the focused silence of someone waiting for a cue. "This house has got to be worth what, $380 now?" Derek said, refilling his wine glass. "Maybe 400. More," I said. He nodded slowly. "You ever think about what happens to it?" "Down the road. Practically speaking, I have a will," I said. "It's handled." Patricia looked up from her plate. "Wills can be contested. People contest them all the time when things aren't arranged properly in advance." I looked at her. "Are you speaking from experience?" She set down her fork. "I'm speaking as someone who watched my sister lose her inheritance because her father didn't plan correctly." "I plan correctly," I said. 31 years of other people's finances. I've seen every mistake there is." Derek leaned back in his chair with the particular ease of a man who thinks he's already won something. "Dad, come on. We're not talking about strangers here. We're talking about family. We're talking about what's fair." "What's fair?" I repeated. "Melissa and I have been carrying a lot. Mortgage, her mother's medical bills, the loan we took out last year. And you're sitting on $400,000 of real estate. That's just, what, a monument to the past?" I set my fork down carefully. I looked at my son, the boy I'd driven to school for 12 years, coached in Little League, sat beside in the hospital waiting room the night he broke his collarbone falling off a roof he had no business being on. I looked at him and I thought, there it is. The real reason for the separate cars. A monument to the past. I said, "You know what I mean." "Carol died in the bedroom upstairs," I said. I held her hand. "I was with her every day for 11 months. This is not a monument. This is where I live." Melissa spoke for the first time. "Derek just means that it would be so much more useful to everyone if the equity were accessible now instead of later. You're 68. What are you actually doing with 4 bedrooms?" "Living," I said. "Same as I was last week and the week before." Patricia placed both palms flat on the table. "There are options, you know. For men your age who are living alone, maybe not as sharp as they used to be. My neighbor's father moved into an assisted living facility, and he said it was the best decision he ever." I'm sharp enough, I said, to know where this conversation is going. Derek pulled an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. He'd had it in there the whole dinner, pre-prepared. He slid it across the table. Inside was a quitclaim deed, my address, my name in the grantor line, Derek's name in the grantee line, a notary block at the bottom, empty and waiting. We had it drawn up, he said. It's simple. You sign the house over to me now. You keep living here as long as you want, rent-free. And when the time comes, the estate is already settled. No probate, no delays, clean. I picked up the deed. Read every line. Patricia watched me. Melissa watched me. Derek watched me with the practiced patience of a man who's played out a conversation in his head 100 times. I set the deed back down. You said rent-free, I said. Right. You'd still be here. Nothing changes. Except the deed. Except the deed. But that's just paper, Dad. You'd still have your home. I stood and walked to the kitchen, opened the cabinet above the refrigerator. There was a manila envelope there, fat and sealed with a clasp. I'd put it there 2 months ago, in plain sight, in a place I knew I could reach without searching. I walked back to the dining room and set it on the table between us. You're right, I said. Let's talk about paperwork. Derek frowned. What is that? Open it, I said. Melissa reached for it first. Derek put his hand on her arm, then took the envelope himself. The clasp came undone. He reached inside and pulled out the first sheet. It was a letter from Hartwell, Briggs & Coleman, a law firm on 5th Street in downtown Dayton, dated October 3rd. He read the first paragraph. His expression didn't change, but the color did. What is this? My attorney's summary of an irrevocable trust I established September 28th, I said. The house, my retirement accounts, my investment portfolio, and my life insurance policy were transferred into that trust 8 weeks ago. I am the named trustee and sole beneficiary during my lifetime. Upon my death, everything passes to Carol's fund. Melissa's voice was careful. What is Carol's fund? A donor-advised fund I created in your mother's name, I said, looking at Derek. Managed by Fidelity Charitable. The assets will be distributed annually to ovarian cancer research and to a hospice organization here in Dayton, the same hospice that sent nurses to this house for 6 months while Carol was dying, while you were in Phoenix at a real estate conference. Derek's jaw moved, but nothing came out. There was more in the envelope. He kept pulling pages out as if he couldn't stop himself. The second document was a detailed accounting prepared by my firm's successor, Garrett CPA Associates, covering every financial transaction between Derek and me since 2017. The number at the bottom was $91,400. That was the total I'd given or lent him over 6 years. Education loan repayments I'd covered when he fell behind. The down payment on his first condo. Emergency cash transfers, each one with a date, an amount, and a description. 3 of them listed medical expenses. 2 listed car repair. 1 listed business investment opportunity. None of them had been repaid. All of them were documented with bank records, texts, and in 4 cases, signed promissory notes. Derek stared at the total. You kept records of every... I'm an accountant, I said. I keep records of everything. Patricia's voice came from across the table, thin and careful. This seems like a lot of money to loan to your own son without ever asking for it back. I didn't ask, I said, because I believed he'd honor the notes he signed. I have texts where he promised repayment 7 separate times. The most recent was 4 months ago. October 8th. He wrote, and I'll read it exactly. Dad, I know I owe you. I'm going to square it all up by Christmas, I promise you. I looked at Derek. Merry Christmas, I said. He set the papers down on the table. His hands were steady, but his breathing wasn't. The third document was something he didn't expect. It was a transcript partial, 18 pages pulled from recorded conversations. I'd installed a voice-activated digital recorder in the living room in September, after a phone call I overheard while Derek and Melissa were visiting. I'd been in the backyard. The kitchen window was open. I heard Melissa tell someone on the phone that the old man won't last forever and the house is basically already ours. I came inside and made coffee and didn't say a word. But I drove to an electronics store the next morning. Pennsylvania isn't the relevant state here. Ohio is. And Ohio is a one-party consent state. September 14th, I said. You and Melissa were in my living room for approximately 40 minutes while I was in the backyard. You discussed, and I quote the transcript, getting power of attorney set up before he starts going. You discussed having Dr. Weston, the same doctor, Weston, who's been my physician for 9 years, approached about documenting cognitive concerns. You mentioned that Patricia had already spoken to a paralegal friend about the process for challenging a will based on diminished capacity. Patricia stood up from her chair so quickly she knocked it back an inch. That was a private conversation. In my house, I said. With the window open, Melissa turned to Derek. Her face had gone pale in a way that makeup doesn't cover. Derek, it's fine, he said, but his voice had dropped half a register. October 2nd, I continued. Melissa called her sister and said, verbatim, if we can just get the doctor to say he's slipping, the rest is easy. I've seen it done. Her sister asked, what if he contests it? Melissa said, he won't. He trusts Derek. I let that sit in the room for a moment. Melissa pushed back from the table. The fourth document, I said, is a letter from Dr. Sandra Okafor at the University of Dayton Medical Center Geriatric Evaluation Unit. I scheduled a full cognitive assessment on November 12th. MMSE score, 30 out of 30. Montreal Cognitive Assessment, 29 out of 30. The summary reads, patient demonstrates exceptional cognitive function for his age cohort. No evidence of impairment or diminished decision-making capacity. Patient is fully competent for all legal and financial determinations. Derek hadn't moved. He was looking at the table. Patricia found her voice again. You can't record people without their knowledge. There are laws. Ohio Revised Code 2000, 933.52, I said. One-party consent. I was either present or a party to every conversation on that transcript. All 18 pages are admissible in civil court. My attorney reviewed each one. Patricia sat back down slowly. The fifth document, I said, is a certified letter from Hartwell, Briggs & Coleman to Derek Michael Sutton and Melissa Ann Sutton, constituting formal notice of intent to file civil suit for recovery of debt. Total claimed, $91,400, plus interest at the Ohio legal rate of 5% per annum from date of each individual loan. Payment options, $600 monthly for 14 years, or lump sum settlement of $95,200. Failure to respond within 30 days results in filing, civil judgment, wage garnishment, and credit bureau reporting. Melissa's chair scraped back. She walked to the window, arms crossed, looking out at the yard where my Christmas lights were still on, wrapped around the bare oak Carol had planted in 1998. Derek said, very quietly, Dad, when did you? September 29th, I said. One day after I transferred the assets. He ran both hands over his face. When he looked up, he looked old in a way I hadn't noticed before. Not tired old, caught old. We needed the house, he said. We're drowning. You don't know how much pressure. I know exactly how much pressure, I said. I raised you alone. I worked every tax season until April 16th. Then I went back the next day, because clients don't stop having problems. I put you through Ohio State. I covered your down payment. I transferred money every time you asked. I never once let you drown. And you sat at my dining room table on Christmas and handed me a deed. It wasn't he started. You planned to have me declared incompetent, I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You discussed it with your wife. Her mother consulted a paralegal. You were going to use my own doctor, a man I've trusted for 9 years, to support a competency challenge. That's not a financial disagreement. That's elder abuse under Ohio law. Patricia stood again. Now, wait 1 minute. That word is a serious Ohio Revised Code 5,101.6, I said, turning to her. Exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Conspiracy to manipulate legal proceedings to gain control of property. You participated in that planning. I have you on transcript twice. She opened her mouth, closed it. I sat down. For a moment, no one said anything. The candles on the table were still burning. The prime rib had gone cold. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something in the dark. Melissa turned from the window. Her eyes were red, but the set of her jaw was not a person preparing to apologize. What do you want from us? You've clearly already done everything. The house is in a trust. The will is settled. What is this then? A performance? You just wanted to watch us find out? I wanted you to understand, I said, what you were attempting, and I wanted it on record that you understand. Because in 30 days, if I don't receive a payment plan confirmation, that civil suit gets filed. And if either of you initiates any legal action related to my competency or my estate, I will forward the transcript to the Montgomery County Prosecutor's Office. I still know people there. Derek looked at his wife. Some communication passed between them that I couldn't read and didn't need to. The car, I said. The Jeep Grand Cherokee registered in my name that Melissa has been driving for 2 years. I purchased it. The title is in my name. Insurance, registration, maintenance approximately $8,400 per year. Melissa has contributed $0. This is formal demand for return of the vehicle. You have 72 hours. Melissa's voice cracked for the first time. That's my car. You said, I said you could use it. I never transferred title. I have the original purchase documentation, the title, the insurance records. Under Ohio law, failure to return a vehicle upon written demand by the titled owner constitutes unauthorized use. I've already filed the paperwork with my attorney. If the vehicle is not returned to this driveway by Wednesday evening, I instruct Hartwell, Briggs, and Coleman to proceed with a stolen vehicle report. Patricia stood, picked up her purse from the floor beside her chair. Her voice came out flat and final. You're a cold man, Jesse. My name is not Jesse, I said calmly. And I spent Carol's last year watching people be unfailingly kind and gentle while she died. I've used up my patience. She walked to the hallway, took her coat from the closet herself this time. Didn't say goodbye. Derek sat for another minute. Then he gathered the documents from the table, all of them slowly, and put them back in the envelope. He stood. He didn't look at me directly. He looked slightly past me, at the wall, at the framed photo of Carol and me at the Grand Canyon that's hung there since 2009. She would hate this, he said. I looked at the photo, then at him. She would hate what you did, I said. Not what I'm doing. I knew her better than anyone alive, and I know exactly what she would say to you right now. He didn't answer. He took his coat from the closet, held the door open for Melissa, and they left. I heard their cars start in the driveway, 2 separate engines, then 2 sets of headlights sweeping past the window, and then nothing. I sat at the table in the quiet, blew out the candles. The house smelled like rosemary and cold meat and spent wax. I picked up Carol's photograph and held it for a while. Then I washed the dishes. The week between Christmas and New Year is always quiet in my line of work. I used it to do what I'd been putting off for months, replaced the gutters on the east side, repainted the guest room, a pale blue Carol had always wanted, had the security system upgraded by a company on Wilmington Pike. The locksmith came Tuesday. New deadbolts, new keypad, new garage code. The house felt different afterward, the way a room feels different after you've cleaned out what doesn't belong there. Derek texted on the 27th. 2 words. Returning car. No punctuation. No time. The Jeep appeared in my driveway Wednesday at 7 p.m. He didn't ring the bell. Left the keys in the mailbox. I confirmed receipt by text. He read it. Didn't reply. The debt notice went out December 30th. Formally. Through Hartwell, Briggs, and Coleman. On January 3rd, Derek called my attorney's office rather than me. He confirmed the payment plan. $600 per month. Automatic transfer. Starting January 15th, my attorney emailed me the confirmation. I printed it, filed it, made a note in the accounting ledger I've kept since 1991. I told my cousin Ruth about it in early January. She's the only family I have left on my side who lives nearby. a retired school teacher in Centerville, who has known me since I was 9. She called after hearing from Derek, who'd called her claiming I'd had some kind of episode at Christmas, acting erratically, making wild accusations. He sounded very convincing, she told me. He was raised by a man who taught him how to present information clearly, I said. He learned it. She was quiet for a moment. He also sounded genuinely frightened. He should be. Not of you, she said. Of what he almost did. I thought about that afterward. Sat with it for a few days. Ruth has a way of finding the edges of things I'd rather leave whole. The first payment posted January 15th. $600. Derek Sutton. Debt repayment. Memo line blank. I acknowledged it by text. He replied, received. That was all. Pure transaction. Which was right. Some things are irreparable. That's not melodrama. Just arithmetic. When a person spends 3 months planning to strip a 6-8-year-old man of his home by having him declared mentally unfit, the ledger doesn't balance out with a monthly bank transfer. What remains is what it is. We weren't strangers. We were further apart than strangers, because we had been something real once and chose not to be anymore. February brought a letter from the Dayton Hospice Foundation, the organization that had sent nurses to this house during the last months of Carol's life. They'd been designated as a secondary beneficiary of Carol's fund, and their director wrote to acknowledge the bequest. She mentioned that 2 of the nurses who had cared for Carol were still on staff. She said they remembered her. She said the fund would allow them to expand their overnight care program so that patients in the final weeks didn't have to be alone between midnight and 6 a.m. unless they chose to be. I read that letter at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning with a cup of coffee and the early February light coming through the window Carol had loved because it faced the yard where the old oak stood. I folded the letter, put it in the file where I keep things that mean something. My attorney called that same week. He wanted to flag something. A brief inquiry had come through a Dayton area paralegal requesting information about initiating a competency evaluation for an unnamed client over 65. The inquiry had been submitted in late December, then withdrawn in early January. He'd traced it back to a contact associated with Patricia's address in Kettering. Withdrawn, I said. Withdrawn, he confirmed, before my office responded. Likely once she realized the documentation you had would destroy the attempt in court. File it, I said. Under attempted actions, abandoned. In case it matters later. Already done. Derek's second payment came February 15th. On time. He texted the confirmation before I'd even checked the account. I replied, received. Payment 2 confirmed. Next payment March 15th. He sent back. Understood. One evening in March, after the clocks had changed and the light was staying longer, I walked through the house in a way I hadn't since Christmas. Not checking locks or looking at files. Just walking. The living room where we'd had the conversation. The dining room where I'd set the table with Carol's good china. The guest room in its new pale blue. The hallway, with the framed photo of the Grand Canyon still on the wall. Us young and tan and laughing at something the photographer had said. I stood in front of it for a long time. I missed her in the particular, precise way you miss someone who was your entire compass for 34 years, not the soft ache of general grief, the specific absence of a specific person, the way she would have sat with me in the kitchen that night after everyone left and said nothing for a while, and then said exactly the right thing. She always said exactly the right thing when I'd been through something. I'd spent my whole career organizing other people's numbers, building the orderly structure that lets you see where you stand, and Carol was the one who could always tell me where I stood in a way the numbers couldn't. She would have hated what Derek did. Not with coldness. With the deep, quiet hurt of someone who loved him and had expected better. And then she would have looked at me and said something like, "You did what you had to do. Now be done with it." I went back to the kitchen, made dinner for one, set the table the way she'd taught me, because habits aren't about the number of people present. They're about who you are in an empty room. The third payment came March 15th. On time. I acknowledged it. 11 years and 11 months remained on the schedule. The math was exact, and the outcome was fixed. Evidence doesn't change its mind. Documentation doesn't soften. Justice, the real kind, the kind you build one verified fact at a time over 3 patient months, doesn't require you to feel anything in particular about it afterward. I felt clear. That was the best word for it. Not happy, not victorious. Clear. The way the air feels in Dayton on a cold morning in March when the sky goes entirely blue and there's no mist and you can see further than you expected. I had my house. I had Carol's photograph. I had work I understood, and a ledger I kept honestly. I had Ruth calling on Thursdays and the Hospice Foundation letter in my file, and an oak tree in the yard that Carol had planted from a sapling, and that was not going anywhere. Some people would call this a sad ending. An old man alone in a 4-bedroom house, family estranged, Christmas dinner that became a courtroom. I understand why they'd say that. I understand and I disagree. What I had before Christmas was not a family. It was a performance of a family, maintained by my willingness to accept less than what it was. What I have now is something smaller and entirely true. Carol used to say that the most important thing an accountant knows is the difference between what something is worth and what someone tells you it's worth. She meant money. She meant more than money. I spent 31 years building that skill, and in the end, it was the most important thing I owned. I made the table for one that night, same as every night. Good plate, cloth napkin, candle in the center. It was enough. It was exactly enough. That's what I know how to measure.